Hi, everyone. Welcome. I'm Mara Mills, and I'm a professor of media studies at New York University. I'm also co-director of the NYU Center for Disability Studies, which is a platform for disability arts and design and scholarship on campus and beyond. It's been fantastic to see increasing attention to disability at South by Southwest over the last few years. And I'm personally thrilled to get to moderate this 2021 conversation with experts from Fiverr and Etsy and Be My Eyes. So we're here to raise visibility about disability in tech spaces. Conversations about tech and disability often focus on consumers and compliance, and accessible product design. These things are all really important, but we also want to talk about working in the tech industry. What can tech do to support the hiring and engagement of more disabled people? Disabled people remain underemployed across age groups and educational attainment, even though studies have demonstrated a wide range of material benefits as a result of equitable hiring. For instance, a 2015 to 2018 study by Disability In, this is the leading business inclusion nonprofit, showed that inclusive companies outperform their peers with 28% higher revenue on average and 30% greater profit margins. So workplace exclusion is often based on stigma and other misconceptions about disability. And our question today is, how can the tech industry change that? I want to start by giving everyone else a chance to introduce themselves and tell us about their work related to access and disability justice. So Christina, let's start with you.
Thanks so much. I'm Christina Goldschmidt, and I'm the head of product design at Etsy. And for those of you that don't know, Etsy is a marketplace that brings sellers and buyers together for special items. So we have a great collection of items that are handmade and actually vintage. And so my job as the head of product design is actually to lead the design of the product. And actually that does include making sure that everything that we design is accessible. And also on a personal level, I am someone that actually has dyslexia and also suffers from post-traumatic stress disorder. And so I don't know if people know, but disability takes many forms. And actually, according to the CDC, 1 in 4 people in the US actually is disabled. And so disability can be, from a visual standpoint, an auditory standpoint, mobile or dexterity, I can't even say it right now. I'm sorry, dexterity standpoint or cognitive, right? So in my case, I fall into that cognitive standpoint. And so really trying to get education out there that there are multiple forms of disability. And I really work to try and make sure that everything that we designed at Etsy is accounting for all of those different forms, and making sure that everything that we do from a product standpoint works that way. From a leadership standpoint and hiring, also trying to make sure that we really try to drive for diversity, inclusion, and equity in who we hire, because that's going to lead to better products. Because if we have people who actually understand, because they are navigating our products, they can actually design for people who are going to use those products. And a big part of that is also making sure that we're accounting for, even from a PTSD standpoint, though PTSD isn't in itself a disability, but you can lead to classifications of disability when it gets really intense for some people. And so Etsy actually this past year formed its first employee resource group to help support people with disabilities. And I'm really happy to be the co-chair of that new ERG. And so really trying to fight for awareness for mental health and resources for mental health across Etsy, and really making sure that people know, that they have a place in the workforce in order to make it, an easier time for themselves, and how to help fight burnout and things like that.
Thank you so much, Christina. And thank you for setting the stage for us so wonderfully. That was really helpful. Will, tell us what you're up to at Be My Eyes.
Yeah, so my name's Will Butler. I am VP of Community at Be My Eyes, which is a free mobile app that allows blind, low vision, visually impaired people to get video support whenever they need it. And we have this big community. It's one of the biggest blind communities out there. Getting visual support from volunteers and companies all around the world through this live video platform. I think, you know, for me personally, my disability was acquired. I became legally blind when I was 19 and spent the first 4 years or so really hiding it, remaining very closeted about it. And it wasn't until I was 23 that I started using a white cane and really sort of came out as blind. And yeah, so I'm very passionate about helping people get plugged in with resources and also community. I really think that the community aspect of it is such an important piece. And I'm really pleased to be here to talk about all that today.
Thank you. And last but not least, we'd love to hear more about your work at Fiverr.
Thank you, Mara. Hi, everyone. It's great to be here. My name is Mor Levin-Hartzang, and I work as a program manager at Fiverr. I work for the Disability Product Innovation Group. And right now I'm managing a program called Fiverr Empower, where we're dedicating it to helping people with disabilities build their professional experience and their portfolio of work. And of course, find work opportunities as freelancers through the Fiverr platform. Before I joined Fiverr, I worked for the Israeli National Institute for Rehabilitation of the Brain Injured, where I help people who suffer traumatic experiences and were left with severe brain injuries find work. And my true passion in life is being able to help give everybody a fair chance. I tried to work hard at my previous job to embody that. And after coming to Fiverr, actually, it's one of the things I love most about the Fiverr platform and the company. You know, it's inclusive, period. It's there for anyone, anytime, anywhere. And we see so many wonderful stories through the Fiverr Empower program from our graduates who say that, you know, for the first time ever, they feel they aren't judged on their disabilities, only on their quality of work. And I think the work we're doing at Fiverr in this area is incredible. You know, our programs are getting bigger, the scale is getting larger, and we're continuing to help more and more people with disabilities everywhere. And yeah, I'm really excited to be here with you guys, and thank you for having me.
Thanks. So disability is an incredibly internally diverse category, as we've just heard from Christina. And actually, I feel really lucky to have 3 very different companies and 3 very different people as part of this conversation, because often conversations about disability can tend to be siloed around particular focus groups. So just your range of expertise is fantastic. And as Christina mentioned, in the US, 20 to 25% of people identify as having a disability. Yet even after the passage of the ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act in 1990, disabled people remain underrepresented in the workforce. I was recently looking at the Bureau of Labor Statistics, and approximately 70% of disabled people of working age are currently unemployed. And this is just an unacceptable number. So the next question I want to ask you is just from hiring to retention to visibility and representation, what can tech companies do to change that? And this time, let me start with Will.
Yeah, I mean, I really do think it's largely a visibility issue, because, I mean, just speaking from my own personal experience, when I had my first job out of college, I was a journalist working in a small newsroom. I was legally blind and I was unable to tell my colleagues about that. I was unable to talk about it. And I think that the thing we forget is that there are people working in our workplaces already that have disabilities. And the first step is to make sure that those people are comfortable being seen for who they are completely, so that the culture can shift to an inclusive culture that then goes and hires inclusively, right? Because if someone is applying for a job at a place that doesn't have an inclusive culture, there's going to be a natural friction there. So how do you do that? I think you have public conversations around disability and inclusion. I know that's something people tend to be nervous about, but there are ways to do this. And you have at the highest level, you have leadership, maybe talk about their own experience with disability. because it's really not. The disability penetrates every single level of from the C-suite to the rank and file. So I think that it's really important that everyone be seen before we can make changes.
Thank you, Will. That's such an important reminder that, of course, any statistic is not going to count people who aren't self-reporting, and people don't self-report in a hostile climate often. And yeah, when we talk about the workforce, we're talking about tech work at every level, including leadership. So thank you so much for that. Moore, what's your take on this topic?
Thank you, Mara. I have to tell you, Will, after hearing your answer, it gives me such energy, to continue and do what I do. I'm not a person with a disability myself, but, it's really, it's so important, to be inclusive, period. And yeah, thank you for that. I just loved your answer. So I agree. And I think, the one word that comes to mind, Mara, is education. I think businesses need to get better educated about the benefits of diversity in the workplace, and specifically of hiring people with disabilities. I think that to this day, the word disability and talking about hiring people with disabilities is a topic that most companies are afraid of, to be honest. And I came across research in my work that showed that 70% of small businesses said they would not hire a person only because he or she has a disability. What these companies don't realize is that they're doing themselves a disservice. The more we educate people in the corporate world about disability representation, the more they'll understand its importance and positive impact, both financially and socially. The one thing I learned during my work, and this really stuck with me, is that, the hiring part of the disabled people is actually the easy part. It's the making it work part that's, hardest. That's what being inclusive is all about. A company can hire somebody that's disabled, but afterwards, what do they do for that person's success on the job? Maybe he needs support or mentorship or special equipment or office supplies. There needs to be a person in charge of the diverse hiring process and the mentoring afterwards in order to make sure all sides are content. And I think that person can also be the educator for that business in representing the community. And on a personal note, the first time I met Fiverr was actually when I was working for the National Institute for Rehabilitation of the Brain Injured, and I helped them hire one of my patients. That's how we met. And it was amazing to see how Fiverr, immediately asked all the right questions, provided her with the support and mentorship she needed, not to just get by, but to really succeed over time. And until this day, and she's working there for about 4 or 5 years now, she has someone to turn to with every need. She's super engaged and she's doing an amazing job.
Thanks. And Christina, I know you've thought a lot about this topic personally and also at Etsy. Tell us a little bit more.
Yeah, thanks, Mar. I just really want to, I think, probably add on to what Will and Moore are saying, right? Like they are really hitting both of the two major points here, that education is so critical, and for people to really see it happen at a representation level with leadership. And we've actually seen this work in other forms of diversity. And I think that's what everyone needs to learn, is to follow that kind of form of best practice. And I think that's why it's been so impactful for me to actually speak openly about my forms of disability within my career and also within Etsy. And so I actually am the person who does accessibility training for the design team, that I walk the team through accessibility best practices and talk about my own experiences and why it matters, and put it into context. And so that they see from a leadership level down that it sort of like sets that accountability. And I think that really helps to bring it all full circle. And then it makes it safe and inclusive for people to say, to Will's point, to the first question, that I can come forward and I can actually see myself in this organization. And so at Etsy, we're really trying to strive to be much more inclusive and make that happen at all levels. And I think a lot of it happens when you get representation at the leadership level.
This is a good point, Christina. The inclusion is not about making disability vanish or disappear. What you're saying is basically that disability and identity and culture can still matter in the workplace, that inclusion changes the workspace and the culture of the workspace itself. So we need leadership. Oh, wait, please go ahead.
Yeah. And actually it made me think, there's one other thing that I like to tell people is that I actually see it as being part of my superpowers. I actually, because of how I see differently, I can actually tell when an item in a design is 1 pixel off. And so there are things that change because I see differently. And so when people start to see that, they start to see that there are actually even benefits to it too. And that starts to change the dialogue a lot more, right? And then you start to see that, oh, there's all these other benefits to having people with disabilities, and Mar was hitting on this too, right? That we get to have this benefit of knowing and designing for our customers, but then there are superpowers that come with it as well.
I love that point. Yeah, I mean, like you said, we need leadership to enforce existing laws about not being biased in hiring, but even bigger than that, there needs to be this changing culture. And the changing culture happens with different hiring. A lot of my deaf friends use the phrase deaf gain instead of hearing loss to talk about the benefits of thinking about sound and communicating differently that come from deafness. So it's very similar to what you were just describing. I really love that point. And I should say anyone should feel free to jump in. Here we are on Zoom, and as we're used to it now, but that doesn't mean we can't break through these little boxes as we're having the conversation.
I'm just picturing Christina with a superwoman outfit, and I love that.
So feel free to talk over me. Well, all of these stories about inclusion show that technology doesn't exist in a vacuum. Obviously training is important and climate is important, but new tools and basic technical accessibility are nonetheless essential to achieving equity. So this is a technology question. Whether it's in your workplace or online or just out and about in the public sphere, in the city, what recent technology have you seen in your fields or in your life that you think promises a more accessible future? And this time I'll start with Moore.
I actually had an experience recently working with a disabled student, someone who was blind, and we brought her into the Fiverr Empower program. We were sure the Fiverr platform was fully accessible and inclusive. We were very proud of that. And for the most part, it was. However, this student pointed out while going through the program that, a few places on the platform weren't. And, only thanks to her and working with her, we are now 100% accessible. And the experience with her made us realize and think about how important it is to step, outside of just the company's own four walls in order to truly build innovative and inclusive products. And this is something that was an easy fix. We just needed her or, someone with that ability to point it out to us. And I think that if all companies invested more in focus groups and learning from that community, products will be built more inclusively right from the start.
This seems like an obvious, but it's not always, it's usually not followed through with kind of point, which is just involving stakeholders from the get-go. And I love what you're saying, that some of these fixes can be really easy and not expensive, that the fear people have about revising and changing a platform, actually, it can often be quite simple. Thank you so much for sharing that example. Did you want to say one other thing more too?
No, you're exactly right. I mean, management sits and decides what's going to be on the accessible platform, and and when they ask the right person or the focus group, they gain so much more. It should be very natural to do that, but need to be educated about that a little bit, I think.
Thanks so much. And what's your take on this, Will?
Well, so people use Be My Eyes when something isn't working, right? Be My Eyes is a video support tool that allows you to bridge a gap between something that should be accessible and something that isn't accessible. So we see and hear about all of the things that aren't working for people who are blind and low vision, which is why we started working with brands, so that we could create a better feedback mechanism so that we can have sort of that live ongoing focus group in the wild with everyone's products, and people, companies could physically see where their products were failing blind users. But I think also it's important to recognize, and part of this is accessibility is now part of mainstream technology, and it's part of every tool, like it or not, that's on the market. And it's either you have good accessibility or you have bad accessibility. And every workplace has a million different cloud softwares and tools and widgets and HR things and punch in, clock out, all these different tools that have varying degrees of accessibility. And if those aren't accessible, you are preventing your staff with disabilities from working. So I can't emphasize enough how important it is that companies are thinking about that in the procurement process when they're buying these technologies for the first time, because that's when you have the leverage to be able to say, is this product accessible? Is it going to work for every single one of my employees? And they'll have to tell you yes if they want you to buy the product. A lot of times you will hear, oh, let me check with our supervisors. We've never gotten that question before, which is usually not the case. Usually they have heard this question before. It's becoming more and more common. And it's really important that people base their purchases off of accessibility. Otherwise, things won't change. And there are clawback clauses that you can put into an agreement, into a purchase agreement, saying, if this doesn't turn out to be accessible, we won't use it. Because you wouldn't buy software that your most crucial employee, imagine you bought some software and the login just didn't work, right? You'd be furious. You'd be furious, and you'd come back to the person who made the software and say, this doesn't work for one of my employees. That's what's happening to employees with disabilities every day. Every single minute of every single day, employees with disabilities are struggling with these platforms, and that needs to be recognized and addressed early on in the process.
Will, can I ask a little follow-up question for you, which is just, is your goal at Be My Eyes to make yourself obsolescent, or
Absolutely.
Is that just so, is that so far off?
I got so many hobbies, Mara. I would love to be windsurfing or skydiving or whatever it is but unfortunately, I think we have a long way to go before we're connecting the feedback communities with the product designers and really making sure that there's a very, very smooth loop of iteration going on that promotes accessibility.
And Christina, what technology at Etsy or beyond do you feel hopeful about?
Yeah, I'm going to actually talk beyond Etsy. And that is, a lot of us have been feeling fatigue because we're on our computers all the time now. And also, as someone who has dyslexia, sometimes it is very hard for me to just keep reading. And so something that I've been doing is actually hacking that. And there are actually a couple of ways that you can do that, whether or not you have dyslexia or not. And it might just be because you have that screen fatigue. And so one, you can actually use some shortcuts on your Mac, and you can program your Mac to use shortcuts to actually do select text and read it back to you. So you can actually set hotkeys, if you will. So Google that, because that's actually a fun thing. But also there are some free services out there. So like Podcastle, where you can drop in any text and it'll turn it into like a podcast for you. Or else there's actually something called Natural Readers, which will also do the same, where you can drop in a bunch of text and it'll read it to you. And so I think those are some pretty cool technologies that can just sort of like allow you to use a different sense if you're having fatigue with another sense, just to allow you to switch and make something more accessible. And something else that I've actually been interested in that sort of changed because of COVID is a change in treatment methodologies. So psychedelic medicines have been on the rise for treatments for mental health. And one of them that's legal is ketamine. And so ketamine is used to treat depression, anxiety, and some forms of PTSD. And traditionally, it's really expensive and you have to go into a clinic and it's administered through IV. But there's a new startup that I've been watching that will send you a dissolvable pill in the mail. And then they have an app experience that's sort of like a Calm, where they have guided treatment for you and a therapist that you can do via telemedicine. And so you can get that same kind of treatment experience completely remotely in these times of COVID or after. And I think it's really cool to see how different forms of medicine are changing to support people, both in these COVID times and afterwards. And I think that that's really cool to think about technology in those kind of new ways as well. To, like accessibility of new forms of treatment is, I think, a pretty cool one to watch.
I am definitely surviving because of my telepsychiatry this year. Although I have to say it's much more staid than that. My father was an LSD researcher in the 70s, but my current telepsychiatry isn't involving ketamine, but I'm going to look that up for sure. And I love that example. I have a student who's written a book on telepsychiatry that's coming out from MIT Press. Anyone who's interested in the long history of that topic, look up Hannah Zevon's book. It's a really important, a huge shift has been happening in that, just in that field, teletherapy and telemedicine right now. And actually that shift is happening, as we all know, because of the pandemic. And I actually think we should address that head on. I want to ask a final formal question right now, transitioning from Christina's comment. We'll have some time maybe for some open comments after this, but let's talk for a minute about this year that we've been living through. It has been one of immense illness, unemployment. We're talking about the workplace, but in the context of lots and lots of people losing their jobs, and also massive infrastructural change. And disabled people, as most people know, especially people of color, have been at greatest risk of infection and death from COVID-19. In response, many disability activists have taken leadership roles. They've marshaled their long-held expertise regarding things like quarantine and remote work and digital activism and distributed mutual aid. So I just want to ask you all this question: how has COVID impacted the disability communities you work with, or you yourself, or the disability advocacy space that you are part of? Do you think going remote has made things more inclusive, or have you felt that accessibility initiatives have been placed on the back burner? And maybe I'll just pass this to Christina, since you brought us into this topic of remote care. Just say a little bit more.
Yeah, thank you for that. I think it's a double-edged sword, right? What a tragedy it's been, and it's been very difficult. But one of the things that's happened is some people really rely on their employers for specialty equipment to do their jobs. And so if you have been impacted or you have just been forced to go work from home, you may not have access to that specialty equipment anymore. And you might have been able to leverage that equipment from your home, to support you, and you may not have access to it anymore. And that, I think, is really hard for a lot of people. And something that if you're not disabled, you may not think about, that sometimes employers can really have that extra support for the disabled, and or just what comes with additional benefits if you lose those benefits through your employer. Also, if you're starting to venture into things like PTSD, you might actually get a lot of support from the people that you work with. And so there could be networks, or just seeing people and having those support networks from having in-person interactions. So the UK actually, before COVID, had a big health crisis around loneliness. And they actually targeted that towards the elderly. But one of the things that we're seeing during COVID is that it affects a lot of single people who are now isolated at home, who might have actually got a lot of satisfaction and interaction from work, and of course, being able to go out and socialize outside of work, of course. But so loneliness is now becoming this big topic. And of course, telemedicine and teletherapy are hugely on the rise in order to support people. But it's the big thing that is happening and really come to the forefront because of COVID. So these areas are really big, major topics that people are really being faced with. But on the flip side, things like remote work are being heavily normalized. I know, that a lot of companies previously might not have been open to remote work or thought that it was not a part of their culture. And now that everyone was forced to go remote, have been much more open to it and have figured out how to make it work because they've had to do it for over a year. And so that drives a much more greater form of, accessibility, or allows people to have much more flexible hours, or to even set up, their spaces and their boundaries better. And so I think that is why it is this double-edged sword, because there is some good with some bad.
What a loneliness cure it would have been to all be able to go to South by Southwest in person this year. We're hanging on. Thank you for that, Christina. And more, tell us from your perspective or from Fiverr's perspective about thoughts on this past year.
So, no matter how we look at it, right, COVID by nature has been bad for mankind. That said, Fiverr is all about remote working. What we've been preaching, I feel, for 11 years now, the world has come to it. And, as technology advances and attitude change, job opportunities do increase for people with disabilities. There's much more room for flexibility, and that is needed. It's better to have a choice. They have a choice now, whether you want to leave the house and go to the office, whether you want to stay home, about the hours you want to work and during which you're most productive. And I've seen, since COVID, I've actually seen so many in the disabled community through our program thrive because of the professional flexibility that they are now offered. And while COVID, definitely has hurt us in so many ways, I do think that it brought about an openness to flexibility and an openness to understanding some individuals have no choice but to stay at home and can do an amazing job professionally. And, they might have a disability, however, the disability may have nothing to do with their professional ability. And the openness to that is an incredible thing, I think, to humanity.
And Will, let's hear from you. I feel like I've seen you on so many podcasts and on so many different live cast conferences this year. I don't know if it's a coincidence or if it's just more visibility for Be My Eyes and for your own personal work because of COVID. I'm giving you an extra hard question here because I'm adding a piece to it. But tell us about this past year from your perspective.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I was recently on the front page of the California section of the LA Times with a headline that said, blind facing new challenges during the pandemic. And I have very mixed feelings about this because on one hand, generally I'm okay, right? On the other hand, so I don't want to misportray, I don't want to continue that portrayal of disabilities as being this victim group. On the other hand, yeah, it's really hard. And I think we need to acknowledge our challenges and because otherwise we're never going to move past them. It is difficult for me to go grocery shopping and more difficult during COVID. And that's not because of some, because necessarily my medical condition. Has a lot more to do with the way that grocery store is designed or the fact that there's no system for accommodating someone. So I think it is really important that we sit with what are the challenges that COVID has brought to the forefront. They were probably already challenges that already existed, and it's just painting them more clearly now. If I had to pick a silver lining, I would say, kind of to your point, some of the legacy groups that were creating community prior to the pandemic are fully embracing a digital transformation and digital communities, digital inclusion. So we have big groups like the advocacy groups and smaller rehabilitation organizations really leaning full on into virtual conferences, virtual gatherings, regular community calls, things where hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people are showing up. And these are people who never would have been able to attend a conference, who never would have been able to benefit from all that institutional knowledge unless these older, bigger organizations were pushed to bring their communities online.
Thank you. And thank you also for bringing up what disability activists call the social model of disability, and that filtered into academia and design and all sorts of parts of the world, which is just that disability is exacerbated and often created by architecture, by designed spaces, more so than by any kind of physical difference. This point you made about grocery shopping.
Absolutely.
I'm glad that could have been a framing concept that we started this conversation with, but I'm glad that as we're winding down, you brought that up. I want to just leave a moment to see if anyone has any questions they want to ask each other or any thoughts you want to leave us with.
I had one quick thought. We haven't explicitly talked about it, but everyone's really been talking about design problems. And I just want to bring that to the forefront of that when we discuss what these challenges are, we're really talking about design, and these design problems can be in the physical space or in the digital space, but it's almost like I want to call more designers to the forefront in order to help solve these problems. And that also I want to also challenge non-designers out there to think this way and to try and also be more empathetic and to embrace this and to embrace it in your hiring, because we can solve these design problems when we get more inclusion into our workforces and really try and make sure that we're having the actual people who can say, oh, this isn't working for me, and see that in action and empathize, right? Like that would be the best. And so that's like a fundamental principle of design. Let's put that into action and let's make a difference.
I couldn't agree more, Christina. Disability is designed. It absolutely is. It's a man-made construct, and everyone knows that every body is different. Every mind is different. It's all on a wide spectrum. It's about thinking about these factors when we're building stuff, when we're building experiences. Absolutely.
And it sounds, what you're saying, Christina, is it's easy. We can do something about it, and let's just do it. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
In the 10 years that I've been at NYU, I've seen increasing formal coursework and attention to disability in design and accessible design. The Tandon School of Engineering founded a whole lab called the Ability Project, and the Tisch ITP program has subgroups around accessibility. So I think there's a growing movement to train designers and the sort of suite of skills around design in this area. But my colleague Cynthia Bennett, who's a blind HCI researcher at Carnegie Mellon, gave me a really sobering article the other day that showed that for at least right now, students who are trained in accessibility, whether this is engineering or design, when they get into the workplace, they often start to abandon those skills because no one will, when they're the only person in the workplace who cares or who is trying, even people who are specifically trained in that sometimes lose some of those skills. So I think we need more, you're right, we need more people designing who care about this. And then there needs to be momentum inside industry to keep those people who are eager and ready, like doing the work that they're there to do.
Yeah. Mara, I have to shout out the Valuable 500 because Caroline Casey over in Ireland has done some incredible work to get 500 of the most valuable companies around the world to have their CEO sign a pledge that they're going to put disability inclusion on their board agenda. And when I talked to Caroline last year, I think they were only at like 240, and now they're in the mid to high 400s. So we're about to hit 500 big companies who are saying, not only, you know, at the executive level, we're putting this on the agenda. And that is the thing that's going to open the doors so that when these young designers come in and are like, yeah, I know about accessibility, they're going to quickly rise through the ranks and be able to implement that and not meet that cultural resistance.
You know, Will, about the Valuable 500, I met her and I just love that. And when I talked to her, I mean, I know companies need to have like 1,000 employees at least in order to join. And I have a weekly with the talent acquisition manager. Every time I check, I bug her. How many are we now? Because, you know, when I started, we were about 500, and now we're 850. So
Hey.
you know, we hired a lot. So yeah, we're getting there, and we're going to join definitely. I mean, that's one of my goals for sure.
The good news is I don't think they're going to stop at 500. I think the whole point is that they've created the conversation and a platform so that anyone can go through that process to really
completely
put these things into action.
Yeah, and yeah, it's not that, you know, it's not that hard. I don't know how to say it differently, right? Let's just do it.
I like that spirit. That's good.
I'm so glad to know about this. Actually, as someone in the world of academia, I hadn't heard about this group yet, or this project yet. I know the four of us could keep talking, and probably when we hit pause, we will keep chatting. But for the purposes of our formal conversation for South by Southwest, we are running up against time, and there is a time limit. So I just want to personally thank you, Will and Christina and Moore, for this great conversation and for other conversations we've had, and just really for all the work you're doing on behalf of design justice and disabled workers. I've taken a lot from all of your examples today. You know, accessibility in the tech industry is possible. It is happening, and it isn't necessarily hard, but new tools and education have to go hand in hand. And when workplaces change, when more disabled people are present, then, you know, design and media representation follow. And I guess I should just also say that anyone who's watching this who would like to join the conversation, we would all love to hear from you, and you should feel free to connect with us on Twitter or LinkedIn. You can probably dig up our email addresses too. But yeah, in an asynchronous way, we can keep having this conversation. Thanks to South by Southwest, and thanks to all of you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thanks, Mara.
Thanks,
great to see you. Thank you.